Noelle Sélevy woke to total darkness, for she was blind. It was impossible for her to place herself in the void. Physically, she was horizontal, and there was a shoulder in her belly. If there had been anything in her stomach, she'd have chucked it up. Noelle had been huffed over one side of somebody strong, and every other step felt like a full-force sucker punch to the gut. Whoever it was had a tight grasp on the back of her boiler suit, which kept her secure, made her feel as though she was fleeing the danger rather than being dragged into it. Fleeing who, though? With who? Jesus. The back of her head felt all hollow. Part of her sought information in the deepest recesses of her mind, but all she found were moth-tuned thoughts and flashing images of her own shaggy green hair. So she'd not been born this way. It had happened to her at some point, and in response to this trauma, she'd been outfitted with this heavy, ring-shaped half mask, which lay clamped over the bridge of her nose and the lobes of her ears. It was pressurized, perhaps computerized. Had she not been helpless in the arms of her captors, she might have been able to remove it. Not that it would have made a difference. She could very well feel that she had no eyes. They were missing. She could hear something strange, like the stretched ringing of synthetic bells. 3 interwoven tones, 3 straight lines that seemed to go on forever. It wasn't an alarm. It was inside her head. And the more that she focused on it, the less sick she felt overall. That is, until she was slung to solid concrete like a sack of shit. No matter how loud they seemed to be, the chimes within her mind could not drown out the sound of steel slicing through the skeletal system. Without making so much as a grunt, Noelle's captor took out 4 of their pursuers at once. Adrenaline and exhaustion rolled off them in the form of smog, and the fumes choked a hock of spit from Noelle's throat. This plausible savior, possible dammer, apologized to Noelle for dropping her, and revealed herself to be a woman named Saigo Satogaeri, though this was no time for introductions. "Are you awake?" she'd said. "Don't rush yourself." It was hard to say from the sound of her voice, but Saigo was probably middle-aged. Experience clung to her words, as did a quaffable kindness offered in a situation undeserving of such pleasantries. It asked for fear. It called for stress. And yet, considering there was a force of 30, maybe 40 footmen encroaching on their position, Noelle felt nothing of the sort. Fight or flight should have shuttled through her veins, and yet some part of her continued to tick back over to the idea that it would simply work out well for this band of total strangers, despite the fact that she knew they'd come to a dead end. Noelle's recovery began with a pins and needles sensation in her fingertips and toes, and with what little energy she'd accumulated from the floor, she attempted to stand, but she couldn't do a damn thing. "Careful," said Saigo. "Believe it or not, but you've been asleep for months. It'll come back, but you have to be patient." She paused. "It's all part of the process." "What process?" Her blood, like lead, sat dense and motionless in her veins. Her limbs were waterlogged timber. Her head was awash with a rushing noise. A thought amongst the tones asked if she'd like to play dead, and another further back told her off for even considering such a charade. "Alright folks, seems thin enough to me," called another cocky voice. It must have belonged to a young man who'd almost certainly just knocked the hard part of his head against an impenetrable steel wall. It did not fill Noelle with confidence, and it did not give her hope. "Don't look at me like that," said the voice. "It's gotta be a way out, don't you think?" "I think." "Okay, whatever. I'll give it a go, eh? Can you hold the baby?" Did she hear that correctly? She did. Baby made 4 of them altogether. So why could Noelle feel more than 6 pairs of eyes on her? Pain, which shot from the back of her thighs right up to the back of her spine, signaled the return of her ability to stand. It wasn't easy. In fact, it hurt more than she had the vocabulary to describe. Seemingly, her senses had come back first, and her mental faculties would follow. "Where we?" she asked shakily, and to nobody in particular. Either one of them could have said something, or even given the wrong answer, and she'd have been okay with that. But all 3 of them left the dead air to just hang there, as though Noelle had made the noise by accident. Doubling down, she attempted to wrap her lips around another sentence. What's happening?" she asked. What's going on? She went on, her mind constructing a fourth and final question, though her lips felt far too foolish to speak it out loud. Why aren't I scared? Don't you worry, said the man, slapping his hand against the wall. We're getting out of this goddamn place, love. Come on, Sharon. Let's show her what we've got, eh? It did not need to be said that Noelle could not see this man. Sure, she could presume that he was muscular because the barricade before them had recoiled at his touch, and she could assume that he was short based on his desire to yell everything that he said. But she could not put a face to his voice, not even in her mind's eye. She could not even pull a face from the doubtless countless years that she'd experienced before this very moment. Instead, the void in which she found herself in became occupied by the wild sparks of her imagination crackling under pressure. As this man focused himself in his worldly energies, she could feel the presence of another being in the room. Air parted at the strange beat of leather wings, and the rattle of snake talk played percussion beneath his actions. It was him, yes, but there was something else within the confines of his corporeal form, a second soul, intertwined and in perfect sync. It wasn't just him. She could detect the same twinned radiance emanating from Saigo, and the child too. A benevolent and enormous force surrounded them all, influencing them, enhancing them. And she had one too. She could feel it. It had something to do with those noises in her head, those 3 straight lines. She could feel one of them bending just slightly as the man changed something tangible about the world. With his hand still flat against the malleable steel, the man let loose a primal scream. The metal cracked, the foundation shook, and by his will, the barrier began to break apart from the middle. Doing so expended a sheer amount of physical energy, so much so he turned the air hot. In that moment, this other presence she'd felt, the one he'd named Sharon, ate up his entire being and allowed him to reorganize the very atoms in his reach. And when he was finished, the bending line unkinked and flattened back out. Escape from wherever she may have been held did not seem like much of an option for Noelle, not in this state. She was standing, sure, but she was also swaying. She couldn't run, needless to say, so the man with the god hands demonstrated further depth in his unusual abilities. From his uniform, he tore a strip of fabric and, with little to no effort at all, changed it into a length of rope. He tied it around her waist through the belt loops of the boiler suit and introduced himself as Mick Strings, King of Things, before doing the same around his own waist. Like this, Mick would drag Noelle onto hard stone, across tarmac, up through dirt, and into the woodland, before the friction burn finally set in and the discomfort forced her to stand. As it happened, she was rather durable, very sturdy indeed, and when her skin did break, any wounds would close themselves, if left alone or forgotten about. Hell, before she could even stand up, the abrasions pulled together and slapped closed. No scars, no injuries discernible by touch, at least. Mick was apologetic, not because she'd gotten scratched, but because she thought he had to stop. I could keep going, he kept telling her. He hadn't even gotten started, apparently. Only problem was that they'd have to stop once an hour for Mick to replace the rope. 60 minutes was the upper limit for the King of Things. Saigo confirmed that they would no longer need to run. For now, at least, they had put a fair jaunt between themselves and what they affectionately referred to as the cambion factory. Here, the air tasted cleaner, but it still felt room temperature. It was like she was piloting her own form, only half experiencing the natural. She found that she wasn't listening for birds, and she wasn't listening for bugs. She was listening for helicopters, and was pleased to hear none. That's it then, she said in her first full sentence. This time, she aimed for Saigo, who seemed less inclined to crack a joke. We're not being chased, are we? No more soldiers? Believe it or not, said Saigo, in a soft voice and a straight-to-the-point manner. We are the soldiers. Actually, deserters was probably more apt by this point. Drafted members of a personal legion, hand-fit with a secondary sentience, a paranormal presence, not unlike a poltergeist, able to imbue soldiers with unfathomable abilities. This sentience was known to all as a remnant, a piece of humankind lost ages prior to the acceptance of free will. Long story short, said Mick, they've put a fucking ghost in your brain that'll let you do some real cool shit in exchange for you doing some real dark shit for them. Like, well, I can make anything out of anything as long as I start out with something. Oh, and I'm dead strong. Bugsy Malone here, by which he was presumably referring to Saigo. If she makes direct eye contact, she can read your goddamn mind. I guess you're immune, though. Noelle tutted, and they all fell silent for a bit. It sort of felt like Saigo was shooting him a look, maybe to say, I don't like that nickname, or stop swearing in front of the baby. When she turned the question to herself, the silence did not waver. She might have heard a shrug, or her mind might have been playing tricks. Either way, they did not know, and that meant Noelle had not been rescued to serve a purpose. So nobody's coming after us then. I wouldn't say that, said Saigo. Thing is, said Mick, they make things like us at that cambion factory, but it's staffed with fellas that are just fellas. Salarymen, white-collar guys, hired goons. I mean, they're not coming all the way out here. They'd get slaughtered. And that's not just me being boastful. So, she said, we're safe? Mick almost stifled his laugh, more like he just caught it on the way out with both his hands, and still it slipped through the cracks between his fingers. Eventually it beat him, and he had to catch his breath. Oh, absolutely not. It's just, well, there are soldiers out here that we can't outrun, and they all know exactly where we're going. Can't? Repeated Noelle to a resounding, oh no, it's not that we can't. There's nothing I can't do. But what I mean to say is, he explained, we're gonna have to kill them or they'll keep coming. Got a name and everything too. Call themselves Gatherers. And they're just like us, so be prepared to get your ass handed to you. Saigo continued after him. Believe it or not, but there will be a no-kill order on us. They'll want to collect us preferably without harming us at all. Still, if we're what they're keeping locked up, then the Gatherers are the contingency just in case. In case this happens, finished Mick, referring to their party of near strangers. By now, word's gotten round to all 56 Gatherers, so the closest one will do the deed. You're going to want to be armed, Noelle. I think it would be better than nothing, if I'm honest with you. I concur, declared the King of Things as he tore off another strip of cloth. Against all sense, cloth became steel. It's a sword. Swing wildly and away from yourself, he told her, placing it in her left hand. It didn't do much for her confidence, to be honest. He made one for himself, and then another for Saigo, who swatted at the air only once before telling him that the weight was off. It's a sword, he repeated. Obviously, the heavier, the better. What do you think, Noelle? At the risk of pissing him off, Noelle asked for a gun or something from this century, but the two of them just shrugged her off and broke into a chuckle. A gun? Said Mick, whose laugh was distinctively heartier and more believable. You're having me on. You can't have a gun, you melon. They've all got impact shields. Oh, excuse me, said Noelle in something of a reactive tone. Exactly how long have I been asleep? What is this, the future? It was general knowledge, she was told. Designed sometime in the late 21st century even, which was ages ago. There was this lunatic private military way back when, and they went on to demand an international ceasefire in favor of unifying against greater, more powerful threats. A difficult proposition, of course, but the company had an impressive bargaining chip. A portable force field system known as Foxygen. It was intended to be worn on the wrists and the ankles and would project at a constant rate. It was able to successfully repel projectiles with little to no immediate or lasting damage to the user, unlike bulletproof vests. It was undeniably impressive, and in return for the consideration of their demands, it became a standard issue item. It has remained as such long after the attributed creator passed on to the next world, believing their awarded ceasefire would last indefinitely. As Mick explained it, it ain't gonna stop a car crashing into you, but the smaller, the faster the impact is, the better the shield reacts to it. You get a sword, love, he said. And like the rest of us, you become the car crash.
Alright. Are we about done here, folks?
Called a sing-song voice, stepping into focus. Hard to tell exactly who was speaking, as the voice had been disguised by a modulator worn over the mouth. Could have been going through a loudspeaker, maybe through a protective mask. Hell, maybe a mask was part of their uniform. Noelle hadn't thought to ask. A gatherer had arrived to collect them. Another cambion, one of 50-something. Jesus, what the fuck had she done to deserve this? In came the whisper, the voice inside her head, which sat only beside the one that's usually there. That remnant of something once lost told her not to panic. And because of that, she couldn't. Not that she didn't, but she physically couldn't. All she could manage was to turn to face yet another pair of souls. The opposing forces conjured warped thoughts of squirming claustrophobia. The sound of hoofs and pointed feathers trumpeted the arrival of a powerful foe, and certainly one that confidently knew their own ability.
Well. The gluttony, the pride, and the reject. How long till they grow back, Noelle? Or are your buddies just gonna keep dragging you from place to place?
Oi, called Mick. Don't heckle her, she's blind. What threat could she be?
She's holding a sword, Mick.
Yelled their opponent.
Honestly, what do you think you're doing running off with that baby, Saigo? Where are you running to? You gonna swim to the mainland, you fucking lunatics? You've all got bright green hair. Where could you possibly hide from the director?
Fuck the director, shouted Mick. And fuck the father too.
I don't work for the father, asshole. I work for the mother, and she wants you dead. She just hasn't put the paperwork through yet, so count yourselves very lucky.
God's sake, Ace, he snapped. I was speaking bloody generally. His snark came off with a scoff, but Mick was not to be trifled with. In that instant, he shot off from the ground straight towards his opponent. His immediate acceleration caused a momentary change in the air pressure again, which pushed Noelle to the dirt. Still, it was over before she could even put her head back up from the ground. Mick had been knocked clean out of the air. All it took, Ace, the gatherer, was a single swipe. Mick hadn't even landed a blow. The earth had shaken as a result of his movements, and now his remnant had flatlined. Ace kicked his limp body over.
Still breathing,
they reported.
He's not usually this careless, is he?
Noelle began crawling backward in retreat. She'd realized something. She'd realized that Mick had known he'd lose the fight, though he might have thought he'd last a little bit longer. As soon as he'd recognized which gatherer they'd gotten, it was game over. He knew her by name, for God's sakes. Noelle did not stop when she realized this, nor did she stop when she realized that she would certainly go no further than this. After all, everybody was looking for them, right? How far could she get if she didn't know where the hell she was in the first place? That song in her head was so loud now. She'd hoped that those 3 straight lines might have led in a positive direction, but they'd done no such thing. Ace approached, but Saigo strode forth to meet her, both armed and holding the infant. Overheard, as she passed Noelle's cowering crawl, Saigo appeared to be telling the baby to look her in the eyes. "Nyoro," she said. "Let me see." Nyoro must have been the child's name. It had a nice ring to it, Noelle thought, in a moment of uneasy clarity. She wondered if it meant something. Her brain must have been short-circuiting because she'd stopped moving to think about it. Then, there was an impact and Saigo managed to stay standing afterwards. She'd preempted the movement and blocked it with just one free arm. How? Noelle just waited in awe, her jaw to the floor. Once Saigo had switched on, something clicked within Noelle. Instinctively, she could tell the difference in strength between her and Mick was staggering. It was strange, almost like a sixth sense that let her differentiate these vibrations in the air. At first, it had just been the shadow of these aforementioned presences that she'd felt, but now, all of a sudden, it had become second nature, almost passive. Noelle could feel nearly every movement made by Ace, or Saigo, or Nyoro, simply by the ripples their remnants sent out. It told her something else too. It told her the secret to Saigo's strength was Nyoro. See, Nyoro was a cambion too, just like the rest of them. Of course she was. She was probably the reason they'd escaped, come to think of it. But from what Noelle could make out, Saigo, Mick, and Ace shared an equal partition of their individual bodies with the creatures. In short, they worked in synchronicity with each other to achieve their miracles. But Nyoro, what consciousness does an infant have? Noelle could only detect the remnant. Saigo had said, look me in the eyes. If she could read minds, as Mick had so aptly put it, then that would give her access to 2 remnants at once. But what did that mean, anyway? From where Noelle was sat, frozen stiff, it seemed that both Saigo and Ace were on even footing, and no, Saigo was only making defensive motions, and the fight was drawing a step closer with each block. Where was the voice in her head? Where was Noelle's remnant? Was this it? Supernatural tinnitus? That's what she got in the trade-off for this nightmare reality? No false godhood, no laser beams, no spectral sword, just crashing waves of sound. Just 3 straight lines. No, was one of them bending? A different one now. The bottom one this time. It wasn't long until Saigo was struck down too, kicking up the dust as she landed at Noelle's feet. Now Ace was but a step or 2 away, so close that Noelle could nearly tell what form her remnant had taken within her. Ace smelled of old leather, sweat, and burnt hair. Her breathing was steady through the mask, and there was something like tentacles surrounding her now, though Noelle could not tell whether these were imagined or not. The noises in her own head, well, they were getting too loud now, too loud. It was beginning to cover up reality like a fog. Was it shielding her from witnessing her own untimely death? It swarmed and superseded her voice, her breathing, everything. Noelle waited, and she waited, and eventually the 2 remaining straight lines tapered off and dissipated. She could just hear their ringing beneath the louder, bent bottom line. She wasn't dead, was she? Unless this was death. Noelle could feel a new kind of wind, which had absolutely no temperature. As she breathed it in, particles of sand coated the back of her throat. She felt no need to cough them out. In fact, not breathing at all felt right here. Here. Ace wasn't wherever here was, and neither was Saigo, or Mick, or Neuro. There was somebody, though. Not an unfamiliar presence at all. Not calming, but trustworthy, at least in the sense that this someone, something, did not want her dead. It was something. It was a cat. Well, not a cat, per se. It was just in the shape of a cat. For one, it was now entirely surrounded by those noises that she'd had in her head. Like a thick miasma, it slunk along tiptoe footsteps in the empty space around her. This, she knew by feel alone, was her remnant.
Be not afraid, Noelle Sélevy. You will not be harmed here.
The cat spoke in a half voice which manifested amongst the frequencies like musical notes atop a stave.
You are host to Byleth, fourth-born to Beelzebub. Together we are one. You were built for me, and yet, when you woke, you rejected the visage of the universal machinations, and you rejected me.
I don't remember that, she said. I don't remember that at all.
It will come back to you,
said Byleth.
When you choose to fight. Until then, we must prepare.
We must, Noelle repeated. We, yes, they were we, weren't they? She could feel it. Byleth was purring in her company. They both felt comfortable, even lost here. How did we get here? Where are we? She felt Byleth lay itself down on the dirt of this new world beside her, and so she knelt too. There was nothing there, though, when she reached down to pet them. Might have been inappropriate anyway. It spoke again, in that same calming voice.
This indigo reality that we occupy consists of 3 spinning plates of existence. There is your world, where the universal engine sits at the perfect center of the universe. There is the world above it, on which the expired rely, and there is the one below it, stretched and skewed like a shadow.
As if to mock the spirit, Noelle pretended to survey the location. The ladder, then, is it?
Yes,
said the cat with no change in tone.
This is the filter plate. Mere centuries before your birth, Noelle, humankind was naught but a tame and stationary fuel source under the thumb of the world above your own. After a predetermined period of lifetime, mortal souls were harvested and deposited in the universal engine. In the process, all that was deemed unusable by the engine or unclean by the fide was delegated to the filter. A metaphysical slurry dropped from a great height into this world,
they explained.
Beelzebub, our All-Mother, was born from the resulting negative build-up, and thus came we, the remnants of the human soul.
You're just gonna skip over the whole people of fuel thing then, said Noelle.
We can discuss it, if it would help you,
said the cat.
but it is no longer the truth of the matter. The Fide are long gone, and their home repurposed by a new god.
Let's start with here, shall we? She suggested. Did you bring me here?
No,
Said Byleth.
I simply allow it to happen. This is what we can do. I am the witness to the strings which hold reality together. I could have shown you the gears which turn the plates themselves. With my abilities, we could go anywhere we please, Noelle.
No need to be bitter about it, she said, kicking the dirt at her feet. Byleth continued.
My gift has always been ocular, but I have spent much time pondering whilst you have been asleep. It will take patience, Noelle, and you will need time to adapt, but if you are willing to listen,
said the cat,
I can teach you how to pull apart the sounds around you, and you will return with the ability to survive for as long as you deem necessary.
In the last episode of Pinball. Without eyes and without memories, Noelle Sélevy woke to her own rescue. Two former soldiers, Saigo Satogaeri and Mick Strings, carried her from the Cambion factory, only to be struck down by an enemy known solely as AEGIS. Outmatched in every way, Noelle faced certain death until she fell into another world with the permission of the voice in the back of her head. For hours, the two kept the coarse atmosphere of the filter plate occupied with the sound of conversation. Well, chances are that only Noelle would be able to hear Byleth's strange, silk-soft mutterings, but it was otherwise empty, so that didn't much seem to matter. A range of topics were discussed in order to break the ice. How Byleth could prove that the planet Noelle called Earth had an actual physical engine in the center of it. How Cambion, like herself, could die only from injury and would otherwise live indefinitely. And how there was a god, in the traditional sense of the word, but it wasn't any of the popular ones. And in actual fact, most of their work was delegated to other, smaller gods in other, smaller departments. Byleth had been alive for longer than 1,000 years, depending on your personal definition of time, and during that time, they had inhabited more bodies than they could remember. Not a single one had been blind, though, so rarely did they have the chance to do so much talking, and there were plenty of secrets to go around. Nevertheless, Noelle would inevitably find the longest sought answers were a tad upsetting or difficult to swallow, and she would have to stop asking and start listening. The singing cat made a sufficient tutor, if a succinct one. It seemed that Byleth was only interested in teaching Noelle the bare minimum, the difference between the sound of the filter plate and the sound of the stationary plate that she called home.
It is not in your best interest to visit the world above,
They explained.
There is not much space reserved for our kind.
Byleth's intensive training regime was easier to explain than it was to actually do. See, Noelle had to sit, preferably cross-legged, in the dirt and just listen. As she did this, the presence of the cat vanished in a wisp, and the 3 lines of indistinct noise became a part of her again. She could imagine them clear as day in the middle of her mindscape. It was hard to ignore them. No matter where she turned away, the lines soon caught up and overtook. One line bent at the middle, a fact that she was aware of, but only could detect if she really focused on it. This rounding off of the sound was all important. It represented the filter plate. If her attention faltered, the thick feeling of the lines faded away. Think of a piece of paper. When she tuned in, the words on the paper became embossed and legible, whereas when her mind wandered, it returned to regular old ink. On closer inspection, and with practice, it was evident that these so-called lines were actually made up of these audible fibers, these intricate layered soundscapes which she could single out and manipulate. Or she could one day. For now she needed to focus, for she did not know how long she had left. Presumably, her party had been captured, or were preparing to be moved back to prison by now, but if she could find them, maybe she could bring them here for safekeeping. It was difficult to apply the concept of time to this world. She had absolutely no manner with which to track its passing, nor could she feel anything that resembled it. She didn't seem to get tired at all. Just every now and again, Noelle would realize that they'd been sitting in silence for as long as she could remember, and she'd have to break the ice again in order to feel sane. She'd stand and she'd stretch and she'd walk amongst the nothingness for as long as she needed to, assured by Byleth that the filter consisted mostly of space. She couldn't put a number to it, but the two of them sat there going back and forth from silence of hard concentration to almost meaningless conversation for a day and a half minimum, before she was even allowed to attempt her return. Practice involved following the curved line and picking out the frequency that corresponded to something else in the filter. She found that if she pulled on a thread of sound a few feet ahead of her, she could move herself without standing up. Just a blip, and she was there. It became more and more clear that these noises were actually more like vibrations made by the motion of living beings, breathing space, and forces indefinable. It was a kind of divination. She could use it to sense rocks and the skeletons of old cars amongst the emptiness of the filter. By clenching that sound, by pulling it together by force, she could close the gap between herself and the object. Then, as she grew more and more confident in her manipulations, Byleth would tie off the other sounds to invisible concepts like gravity, luck, and calamity. "Whoa there," said Noelle. "Calamity?"
It is one side of a coin,
said the cat.
Calamity and integrity, the forces of change and of stasis. As its geography is defined by mortal byproducts, like memories of long-gone civilizations and dreams of massive contraptions, the filter plate is a beacon of integrity. As it grows larger with each and every mortal death, the eternal plate, as it is known, radiates calamity.
Noelle finished the thought herself. She had already come so far. And the stationary plate is a mess of both. "Don't worry," she said. "I can feel it." The noises that represented the eternal plate and the filter plate were two almost tranquil streams converging into one screaming river. And if she reached out in her mind and touched the running water within it, she would return to where the air tasted like salt and the wind was a cool mist on her skin. She could hear seabirds, and she could hear waves, and she could hear helicopters above her. Noelle did not return to the same spot that she had departed the stationary plate. It seemed she'd traveled quite the distance. If her ears could be believed, she'd arrived on the coast of whatever godforsaken island she'd been trapped on. "What would have happened if we'd gone into the water?" she asked. "I can't drown, can I?" As if the thought hadn't crossed their mind, she felt Byleth panic momentarily before they said,
"Can you swim?"
"I doubt it," she said, "but I don't need to breathe, do I?"
"It wouldn't end well,"
said Byleth, now collected.
"but I would not allow it. I cannot possess you to do as I wish, Noelle, but I do have some freedoms, and I will not have you betray them. There is a classical paradox,"
Byleth continued,
"in which the hypothetical immortal's chance of being trapped indefinitely eventually always becomes 100%. If, or when, our coexistence ends, I will return to the filter plate, and you..."
Byleth paused, as if they did not know the correct way to end their sentence, or as if they did not know the true answer at all.
"Regardless, if you become trapped, I become trapped."
"You'd rather kill me, duly noted," said the girl. "Now, where do we go from here?" She chose to wait out the helicopters first. Once they'd fled the shoreside airspace, Noelle sat herself down again cross-legged as before and focused on the 3 straight lines. As if guided by Byleth's pause, she sought out the one in the center, solely the stationary plate. Amongst its musical fibers, she could hear the fluorescent hum of the sunlight and feel all the seams in the air. Think a little harder, and she could separate these sounds, tune into the frequencies, tell apart these natural, ambient sounds from the near artificial noise of the mortal soul. Like pistons buried deep underwater, she could hear the presence of people. They weren't too far from her position, and there were either a lot of them or one really big one. She couldn't quite tell. If these pumping blips and peaks in the universal soundscape represented life, then she could only assume that the length of the line itself defined the radius from which she drew this information. Long story short, Noelle guesstimated there was an enemy encampment not too far out from her, certainly within binocular range. She couldn't detect their movements, just their existence, meaning she needed to double the distance between them before she felt safe. It was hard to pin down her own range, for the island itself perpetuated a problem. Specifically, the shoreline made it difficult to concentrate as her semi-stable water metaphor collapsed under its own reality. Noelle turned herself away from the enemy force, took her focus from the center line to the bottom one, and let herself into the filter once more. She figured this one out without Byleth's assistance, though doing it made the back of her head hurt. Evidently, if they occupied similar space, movement in the filter plate meant movement in the stationary plate. She'd seen it done. She'd been nowhere near the ocean before coming back. It was almost like arriving in a different country. So, with confidence, Noelle shuffled forward across the sand, feeling her way through the nothingness. In retrospect, she should have counted her steps to work out the conversion rate, but she was far too busy rebuilding that confidence. Stumbles at first, then long, stoppered steps. Tentatively, she used the sounds and her outstretched hands to find her way around the first obstacle she'd come across. It was concrete, perhaps the wall of an old building. It crumbled under the pressure of her fingertips, and the dust that fell off it lingered lifelessly in the air around her face. It seemed to flake off in chips like lead paint. She followed it lengthways as far as she could until she came across vacant space that might have once held a glass window. It tripped her, and as she fell through it, she fell back into the stationary plate. Fortunately, the strange ring-shaped mask she'd been wearing hit the dirt before her teeth did. A mouthful of dust and dry grass told her she'd escaped the grasp of the ocean tide. Here, there was the electric heartbeat of commercial pylons, like radio interference. Elsewhere, she could hear rubber tires rolling on near-fresh asphalt, a sticky sound, and one far too close for comfort. With a bounce, she returned to the filter and began walking once more. That building, she asked on the way, where'd that come from?
From memories,
Said Byleth.
images that perpetrated the mortal mind once would wind up in the filter plate over time, constructs and statues from ages past. But more recently, dwellings and technology. This is no longer the truth.
Sounds like a mess, said Noelle.
There is more space in the filter than you could possibly imagine,
Replied Byleth.
In the early days of our existence, the architecture would fall from the sky. I have been hit by several pianos.
The next time Noelle surfaced on the stationary plate, she'd risen much higher above sea level and was somewhere near a waterfall. She pricked her ears following the torrent down to where it fueled a generator about half a mile across the way. She could detect a few beating hearts around her, but they were so minuscule that they could have only belonged to a family of hummingbirds. All this searching and seeking had only made her headache worse, and soon blood began to drip out from her ears. It began to pool under the mask. Her fingers found the clasp on each side, and it depressurized at her command. It confirmed one suspicion she'd had, which was that she was not a prisoner in shackles, though it did leave many other questions hanging. She could answer another herself, though. Noelle dropped the mask to the dirt, but it hit a rock on the way down, bounced, and then rolled down a nearby hill. A few steps back, for safety. Then she pawed at her own face, a cheek at first, where the metal had left an imprint on her skin. A little further up, till the tips of her fingers touched her eyelashes. Yes, as she'd assumed, her eyeballs had been removed. Might have been a surgery, but it could have been anything, judging how fast her friction burns had healed. Her eyelids were intact and sealed together. She couldn't pry them apart, not even with both hands. As she gave up, Noelle was grabbed from behind by two arms thicker than tree trunks and pulled backwards 2 steps further. Noelle? You dopey bastard, you. Where have you been? Was that Mick Strings, King of Things? It must have been. Anybody else that strong would have pulled her head off her goddamn body, but he appeared to be hugging her in what amounted to a full Nelson. We've been looking for you for a fucking year, love. You just vanished. You let her go, and all of a sudden, she became aware of their twinned wavelengths. Saigo was there too, along with a third, smaller presence. It wasn't the baby, Nyoro. It was more like an animal, and it sounded like an animal too. Hold on, she said. A year, Byleth? She redirected the question. I've been gone for a year? A year and a half, added Saigo, who then grasped Noelle's hand and shook it quite gently. She appeared to be wearing gloves now. It's nice to see you, Noelle. Are you well? Well enough, she said, shaking back. Noelle told them her tale, where she'd gone, how she'd connected with her remnant, and how she'd only felt the passing of a few days. Then it was their turn. Nyoro was gone, and the party's goal had shifted in direction. After their encounter with the Gatherer, known more properly as the Ace of Cups, Saigo and Mick had woken up more or less unharmed, and where they'd been. Nyoro was Ace's only objective, evidence that the pervasive theory of a hollowed-out host could work, albeit inefficiently. But why, was the question. The passing time had given plenty of opportunity to find an answer. It took a little time to explain though, because Saigo tended to use company-specific jargon, and then Mick had to translate it into actual words for her. So they spoke whilst they returned themselves to the trio's campfire. In essence, it hinged on something that Noelle had noticed during that fight. It was that moment where Saigo had asked the child to look her in the eyes. Nyoro is host to Epis, witness to the immediate timeline, began Saigo. She can see all that is bound to happen. Except, explained Mick, time's always changing, so she's only got 5 minutes ahead of the rest of us. Good for fighting, not for much else. April, who is leading Noelle via a rope leash constructed from a piece of Mick's outfit, bleated in agreement. Saigo, ahead of the pack, continued. If we made eye contact, I could preempt my opponent's movements. Mick nudged Noelle in the ribs. She just needs to touch you now. To get in your head, I mean. Noelle nudged him back. His running commentary was, in fact, not helping at all. She was having a difficult enough time as it was, taking in the nonsense. Especially considering the fact that she was also trying to figure out how much clothing Mick could possibly have left if that was his power. By this point, Saigo was already a few seconds into her ramble, and I don't know the nature of her plan, but the mother needs Nyoro alive, as she is. The Ace of Cups has her, still. That's why we're camped where we are, added Mick, and that's why we've got April here. He nudged Noelle again, but she didn't retaliate. April can sense them. Us. Cambion, he confirmed. Sense them, and dull them out. That's why I could sneak up on you. Saigo was talking still. She was saying, April S is assisting us. We're camped near a company waypoint, a citadel belonging to a mortal militia. Gatherers make regulated stops at these encampments, so eventually we'll catch her. Then I'll fucking give her what for, added Mick, dry punching the thin air. Noelle was confused again, but this time it felt a little reasonable. And then what? She asked. No offense, but you couldn't take her down on your own. What are you going to do against a battalion? Believe it or not, but the no-kill order still stands, said Saigo. And whenever I get my ass handed to me, I always come back stronger, added Mick. Plus, now we've got you back. Dusk fell, and the cicadas awoke before the party arrived at their doused campsite. By now, the wind had become rather cold, somewhat owed to the elevation of the area, and somewhat owed to a sly comment made by Mick earlier in the journey about Saigo's odd habit of collecting insects. She got him to make the jars, not that they lasted any longer than an hour. She was quite embarrassed about it. He only knew because he'd gotten suspicious about the sheer number of jars she'd been asking for. Mick lit the bonfire with a match constructed from the dead arm of a gum tree, and Saigo went off with uncharacteristic shyness. She took April off by the leash and went out to patrol the immediate area. Mick said she'd gotten restless, that he'd been feeling the same way for a long, long time now. He put his boot through an old, rain-logged wooden fence and used 3 splintered fragments to construct 2 stone mugs and a metal kettle. From a backpack, the King of Things produced fresh water and 2 sachets of tea, freeze-dried for longevity. "Couple of weeks ago," he said, putting the water on to boil, "we jumped a supply run from the capital. That's when we got all April. She's like the company mascot. Bit boring, mind you, but more than happy to help us out." "She doesn't say much then?" asked Noelle. He scoffed. "Not to me, but I think Bugsy's had a good word with her though. At least, enough to confirm what we already knew." Mick lifted the kettle off the burn, hissing under his breath as he rehydrated the powder. "Fucking hell," he muttered. Fuck. Done, he lobbed the kettle about 150 feet away from them, where it proceeded to roll off the side of the hill. "Hot, sorry, here ya." Noelle took the stone mug in both hands, blew on it, and sniffed. Didn't smell of anything she recognized. A little smoky, nearly sweet. It was a heartfelt gesture, but it felt a little alien to her. It shouldn't have. It certainly seemed natural, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd not relaxed once in her whole life. "Good, right?" he asked her. "It's that Russian caravan shit." "Did you say capital?" she said, sipping at the brew. It was a bit of an acquired taste, and there was also the threat that it may turn into something else in an hour or so. "Do you know where we are?" "Oh, that's dead easy," he told her, though he didn't rush towards an answer. He let the silence hang a moment, as if to build the tension, cracked his fingers and downed his tea. The mug went in the fire. His hands went back to the backpack to retrieve a plastic package of cigarettes. "You want one? Cigarette?" Noelle shook her head. "Just an answer, please," she told him. "All right, spicy. What were you before this?" he asked, lighting the cig. "A journo? It's Tasmania, love, and it's all theirs. Hell, the factory itself takes up a good chunk of it now, and it's only gotten bigger over the last 20 years. For the duration of Mick's cigarette, they sat in silence. Noelle didn't have much else to ask him. She half wanted to know how they'd managed to survive a year and a half on the outskirts of danger, but the idea that she might be missing 20 years of memories sent such a chill down her spine that her ribcage froze, and she could no longer produce vaporized word forms. Mick, though, was a bit of a talker. "Can't believe you came back, though. Never seen anything like it. It was like you'd been a figment of my goddamn imagination. Honestly." He scooted closer, took one of her hands in his and squeezed, palms like sandpaper where, instead of creases, he had welts and scars. "I'm a lot stronger now," he said. "I can take her. I mean it. You ain't got nothing to worry about now, love. Not when you're around Mick Strings, King of Things." "Why'd she call you the Pride?" asked Noelle. "Back then, when you were fighting." She paused. She almost didn't want to say it. Made her feel silly. The Ace of Cups. "It's fucking dumb, right?" He squeezed her hand again. "Fucking naming conventions, love. All depends on your rank, right? See, we all had a purpose from the get-go. Bugsy and I, we were both personal guards. Physically strong. You still with me?" She nodded. "Cool. We belonged to the father. Bastard of a man. Makes my goddamn skin crawl. He built us, top to bottom. Picked out 7 of us, each with a flaw that he saw as a benefit. The Sinful Project," said Mick. "The pride and the gluttony. That's Saigo, on account of her power. The longer she uses it on you, the more you lose. Taste goes first, then your sight, your hearing." She tried to stop him mid-train of thought. "Did you say built?" But he didn't take any notice of her. He was on a bit of a roll, darting between the cigarette and the revelations. Ace belongs to the mother, and she bloody loves the tarot. "Built?" she repeated, snatching her hand back from him. "You didn't think we were people, did you?" said Mick. Then he snapped his fingers. "Fuck you're blind. If you could see yourself, you wouldn't question it. Nah, we just look like them. Heard someone once describe us as people-shaped people, built from bits," he told her, as he went for a hand once more. "Clay and flesh and all sorts. We got green hair and red eyes, love. You can tell who's who, because we've got numbers tattooed beneath our thumbnails. I'm 07. "And me?" asked Noelle. "What number am I?" He turned her hand around, studied the nails of her thumbs, hummed to himself and said, "Well, you were number 11, he told her. "But you've been struck off the record. There's a line through both numbers. You're a reject, Noelle." In the last episode of Pinball, Noelle Sélevy found herself in the world beneath her own, a place known to its occupants as the filter plate. With the help of Byleth, A separate consciousness alive within her own, Noelle learned to command her innate abilities to unpack the soundscape of reality. Now able to traverse the two worlds, Noelle first returned herself to her own, the stationary plate, only to discover that she'd been gone for more than a year and a half. Upon arrival, she was tracked by Saigo Satogaeri, Mick Strings, and their new cohort, April S. The party of strangers has regrouped with a new mission: collect the infant Neuro from the clutches of the Ace of Cups. Conversation between the two cambion fizzled out much like the first campfire. After an hour, Noelle found herself alone then, without the need to sleep. It was inherent in the air quotes immortal to persist. Mick found both the time and the ability to get in a kip beside the second campfire, which used the real firewood collected by Saigo and April. So, whilst the King of Things snored and kicked at the dirt like a dog, Noelle continued with her self-imposed training. Byleth believed their synchronization to be as good as they could ask for, but it didn't feel any different. By now, she was all but done with any kind of meditation. She still didn't worry, she still didn't feel powerful. She supposed that because she didn't worry, she also didn't feel any particular confidence in herself. She had a goal, sure, but she lacked, not motivation per se, ambition was more like it. All that remained was necessity. She needed to know how long it took to traverse the plates. If she had to escape again, say during their next scheduled confrontation with the Ace of Cups, would she return only to find corpses? Practice makes progress, only it couldn't be done alone. Saigo was off on her own not too far from the pack. That said, there was enough space between them to make it difficult but not impossible to distinguish her minute, crouched movements. She might have been picking at the dirt, looking for bugs, or she could have been tying her shoelaces. It marked the peak effectiveness of her sixth sense at 3.5 meters, estimated as she walked the length, tip to heel, before asking for the loner's assistance in the matter. Saigo wasn't a sleeper either, for cambion do not dream, ever, and since their bodies regenerate apropos of nothing, sleep was redundant, tantamount to time travel, even, and Saigo had no need for time travel. With Neuro, she had seen the immediate future, and it was bleak. It did not take much convincing for Saigo to agree, just the offer of being more than dead weight. Student and teacher left April, who was grazing for little to no reason, and Mick, who was dozing perhaps an inch too close to the fire. It took a few minutes of puzzled directing, pausing, and going on a heading before the two could choose a spot close enough that suited their shared specific requirements. Noelle needed it to be flat, straight, and long, like a road, but it couldn't be paved like a road. If it's paved, it's patrolled, said the teacher. Additionally, Saigo required the area to be somewhat discreet, preferably covered, so as to not draw too much attention. Fair. After all, they'd spent half a year plotting a surprise attack, and while Saigo was impressed that Noelle believed she could aid them, she had no strong feelings toward the thought of Noelle disappearing, if that was easier. They chose a spot in what appeared to lead onto a rainforest, where even the skin-tightening midnight air had been thickened by the scent of eucalyptus drifting in from the west. Now, presuming her mentor had been hiding a digital watch, or had a rudimentary understanding of the stars in relation to the rotation of the Earth, Noelle's methodology was relatively simple. She would pull herself into the filter plate, take a set number of steps, and Saigo would measure the result. Taking up position side by side, Noelle concentrated and fell forwards into that other world, where there was no nighttime. It was temperate there, and almost more comfortable. It took her by surprise how easy traversing the separate dimensions had become. A few seconds of the stalled time passed as she sought to collect herself and found no need to. In fact, it was Byleth who spoke up and reminded her that she was currently on the clock. To measure, she took what she could only describe as the exact length of a single step, and at the end of it, returned with similar ease. With that, she all but considered the technique mastered. Hardly did Noelle show any interest in the third and final melody, stretching out amongst the universe's music. It almost seemed to disappear into the back of her head. She had decided that 2 whole worlds were more than enough for her. Saigo had to stand once Noelle returned, which wasn't a great sign. With intense concentration, Saigo paced towards her new position and counted aloud as she did so. 1 step in the filter plate equaled 8 steps in their world. "You were gone for 15 minutes, said Saigo. "Did you get lost?" To that, Byleth stirred. 15 minutes was by no means an accurate conversion rate, nor did it stand up to the test of repeated experimentation. Space remained consistent, always. 3 steps became 24, a leap became a launch. Time, however, was fickle. It seemed to squash and stretch as she moved along through its distant cousin. See, simply blipping from plate to plate could chip off anywhere from 3 seconds to 5 minutes, rendering her redundant in any high-octane matters. To her, it felt almost instantaneous by the 19th blip, and still, the result was that time was indifferent to her will. Noelle slumped and blew away drips of blood with a raspberry. It seemed as though she would not be able to fulfill the half-formed promise of purpose. Almost angrily, she snapped, "Did you know that I was blind when you rescued me?" "Yes," said Saigo, "I knew." "Then why? With all due respect, I appreciate it, but surely I'm doing you a disservice." She approached and crouched to Noelle's level. "Not at all," said the soldier. "You were around for half of 1 day and then you were gone for nearly 2 years. If anything, we are glad to know that you did not die." Stunned, Noelle could only wipe her face off with her sleeve. Saigo was so close to her now that she could feel the waves her remnant gave off, like a big cat purring, or rather, a grown man's impression of that sound. Her nose soon stopped flowing. It was almost time to try again. She wanted an answer first. "Why?" she repeated. "You already had a baby to look after. Why bother?" "I felt bad for you," she said. It was as simple as that, an act of goodwill. Saigo took a moment to mull over the facts, sort and place her thoughts in a more digestible format. "I was there," she came out with, "when you took your first breath." "I don't remember that," said Noelle. "Do you remember anything?" "Fair point," she shot back. "Continue." "You and I," said Saigo, "we're connected, in the same way that Mick and I are connected. Less thoroughly, of course, but it's the truth. You were born the same as us, a member of the Father's personal guard. You, Noelle, were born to be the envy." "These fucking naming conventions," she cursed beneath her breath. "Am I supposed to know why I deserved that nickname?" Mick had explained Saigo's connection to her name, of course, but envy? For a heartbeat, Noelle's irritation peaked, and she felt red in the face. But after that beat passed, she was back to normal, calm, collected, clueless. "You know what's weird?" she said. "As soon as I woke up, I knew my name. Isn't that weird? Of all things." "We are the sum of many parts," said Saigo, reiterating Mick's earlier revelation of their animate construction. "I have always been able to remember the life of the original Saigo Satogaeri. She taught secondary school. During my tenure as the Gluttony, I have always fought against the instinct that has come with it. It was witnessing the birth of Neuro that triggered my conscience." Noelle said nothing. For a moment, she thought to stand up and blip over to the filter plate to collect herself. But she couldn't do that without risking a week. "We really are freaks, huh?" is what broke the silence. The words passed through her lips without any dental resistance, like any other pleasant conversation starter. Her brain handled the phrase the same way it might handle the words in a novel, as an adjacent bit that simply could not have happened to her, despite all the available evidence. She didn't dilly-dally or ask for a response at all. "There's something holding me back," came out in the form of a malaise-heavy fog, which rolled out of her like she'd put days into a hobby she just couldn't grasp. A stray hand crept up behind her and landed on the top of her head. Saigo had begun patting her and softly stroking the top of her head as though she were a cat. It wasn't a particularly pleasant sensation, but this felt like one of those moments where the thought counted for more than the action itself. "Believe it or not," said Saigo, "that's the answer. There's something holding me back. It's us now. Us." And there was that strange momentary lapse in her total absence of emotion, lasting no longer than a blink. A rush of chemicals soon came to remind her of the futility of struggle, and Noelle came to terms with the violence of truth. Acceptance, an instinct that came with a brief but evident delay. It was faulty wiring in her human remnant connection, a simple enough problem to troubleshoot, diagnosis, memory loss. Byleth offered nothing, for they had seen 100 bodies and could not see a fix for this. Saigo Satogaeri, however, was built for such a situation. She was no longer bound to a contract of eye contact. "Sit down," she told her, leaving little time for Noelle to ask what exactly was happening to her. Simply put, Saigo could not tell Noelle what trauma triggered her rather selective amnesia and hope for the best. It was not as simple as forgetting, as Noelle put it. "I'll sit in front of you," said Saigo, taking position, then placing her hand on Noelle's head again. "If I asked you to clear your mind, would you know what I meant?" "Yes," Noelle nodded, "but it's never very quiet in here." "Do your best," said Saigo, giving the girl another pat. Noelle was cross-legged, but Saigo had chosen to sit on her feet, allowing her to close the distance between them. With greater intent than those who need it, Saigo's breathing became rhythmic, in through the nose, out through the mouth, only stopping to deliver a single line of guided meditation. "Close your eyes and be patient. Breathe as I do, and choose a breath that reflects the serenity that you envisage." And then she went back to breathing. Saigo removed her gloves. She was closer now, so close eventually that they were sharing only a small amount of the earthly oxygen, which only got warmer each time it was passed between lungs. Noelle did her best. Her lungs did not process the air anymore, so no matter how long she held her breath on the inhale, she didn't get at all lightheaded. As soon as she put two thoughts to it, breathing ceased to make sense as an automatic process. It became so difficult to breathe, after a while, that it was all she could think about. And moments after, the connection was made. To Noelle, the inside of her own mind was almost unfamiliar. It was silent, for one thing. The absence of the universal soundscape hung somewhere between the most uncomfortable sensation her subconscious had ever experienced, and ultimately peaceful. It didn't feel very large in there, as offensive as that may have seemed. Saigo was there, and she was taking up much more space than she usually did. With that sixth sense of hers, Noelle could feel Saigo, or at least her remnant, in much higher definition than she could in any real world. It rather definitively told her that it was shaped like a big cat with a man's head, and for once, Noelle felt blessed. "Are you real?" she asked, just in case. She felt off guard and unreasonably alone for somebody in a shared space. Strangely, the figure reacted first with shock. "Oh," said Saigo, "I assumed I was alone in here." "What does it look like to you?" asked Noelle. She shrugged. "Doesn't. It's dark," said Saigo. "It's your Roman room. Why would it?" She'd said it in the least accusatory way, but it, for sure, didn't come off like that. "Do you know where we are?" Noelle paused, sniffed at the air, and noticed that it was cool, almost refrigerated. It was being blown in from somewhere else. It might have been fresh air once, but she could now smell stale blood on it. She noticed she was sitting, not standing, and it was a bed, not a chair. "I think we're in my cell. I suppose I was in a cell at some point." "We rescued you," said Saigo. "From a cell." "Thank you for pausing." "I'm having trouble concentrating," said Saigo, stepping through the darkness. "Usually, I am alone in places like this. If I remember correctly, there's a window here." "A window?" Something sparked something else. A chain reaction happening in the back of her head, where her spinal cord plugged in. Green hair. She could see it, hung over the vision of a mosaic-reinforced window. It lasted for approximately one frightened gulp. Black again, of course. It was only a memory. All three noises returned, carried into the room by the musical cat. Noelle could pick up on Byleth's purring as they entered from behind Saigo, passed through her legs, and arrived atop the bed beside her. "Can she hear that?" she asked Byleth. "Can you hear that?" she repeated. "It's the sound of the universe. Isn't it grating? I hear it all the time, even when other people are speaking." Saigo didn't confirm. She just took another step closer. Byleth did not appreciate the sudden movement, and, as a result, Noelle felt the briefest adrenaline surge a person has ever felt. Saigo stopped, so she must have felt it too. "I can't hurt you," she said, "even if I wanted to." I'm only a guest in your head. I can't even suggest something. I'm only here to look. Good luck with that, snarked Noelle. No, I've seen enough. Believe it or not, there is something holding the two of you back, she explained. Byleth's music continued to emanate from them, but the purring stopped. Byleth doesn't think that you're strong enough, she continued, to face the truth of your blindness. You already told me the truth, said Noelle. You told me that I rejected you and... It was the collision of two simultaneous events that brought Noelle's sentence to a grinding halt. In awe, she was dropped to her knees as a great pike of hurt rammed itself into the apex of her skull, right down to the nape of her neck, as though it was following some cerebral structure. As this happened, Saigo Satogaeri was booted from her mindscape, not by choice. Neither Noelle nor Byleth had made a move against her. It was as though she was projected from her standing position by a powerful blow, and she broke straight through the walls. A swell developed in the abscess of her eye sockets, and it soon grew too large to be contained, stretching and breaking the bone. No amount of scraping and clawing at her own flesh would slow it down. She could hardly tell if she was getting through the skin, even.
I have waited,
spoke the swelling, on a direct line to her brainstem.
There is no more time. As we dawdle and deliberate, your body lays at risk. Will you face up to weakness? Do you wish to learn the truth?
It boomed.
Wish, and we will make it so. March onward to the empty.
She writhed among these words, which came from her own imagined form, squirming, desperate to feel the vessels in her face burst, for some pressure to lift off when the blood spurts and trickles down her fingertips like floodwater. If she did it, she could accept the numbness. Numbness would come after the pain, as it had done before. And then just like that, Noelle no longer hurt. She had rejected Byleth, and now she could remember how she had rejected them. She could remember how they'd woken from what felt like the sweetest dream. A simple day at school, with a girl and a boy, both had very kind faces. She could remember how she woke in a room of mirrors and lights. How she knew that she was being watched from minute one because she could see right through the painted glass. How she could make out monsters in their shadows. How she knew their exact chemical compositions. How she could see their voices in grand, thick shapes. How she saw the molecules of water in the air like swarms of screaming insects. How she saw time itself leave a celestial trail behind the movement of all things. Noelle did it with her own fingers before anybody could stop or restrain her, before anybody could even enter the room. When offered the immeasurable scope of the universal machinations, Noelle Sélevy chose nothingness over everything. She pushed and pierced the soft flesh of her eyeballs. They popped, and it was agonizing. The fluid which ran over her knuckles was warm, but it did not feel as thick as blood. For a moment, she thought she might drown in it, and then all went calm, and all went quiet. She could not recall much more than that, for there was nothing more to remember. Just that girl, and that boy, whom she'd dreamt of for the longest time, and then never again, after Saigo Satogaeri and Mick Strings intervened in her dreaming. You were protecting me, Noelle said to the cat, but I'm not afraid anymore. I understand. I'm not the host you wanted. I threw away your gift because I couldn't comprehend it. Honestly, I don't have use for that sort of thing. I'm not a fighter. I would never have been able to do what they do. Noelle stood to her feet again. The swelling had disappeared, or it had never been there in the first place. Byleth, the cat, stood too, their heavy stare focused straight on their host. I am grateful to Saigo, and to Mick, as I am grateful to you. It was them who woke me up, despite literally being built to destroy. They took pity on me. I'm like a broken machine, she said, as she extended a hand to Byleth. But I know what I have to do to help them, and I want to make a deal. In the last episode of Pinball, after being reunited, the party of strangers took to rest at a campsite amongst reserved territory. As Mick Strings slept beside the fire, Noelle Sélevy sought to discover the true parameters of her remnant's powers. Even with the help of Saigo Satogaeri, mastery seemed impossible. The two were not properly in sync. Byleth's concentration seemed elsewhere. With her own abilities, Saigo entered Noelle's mind to help her diagnose the problem, only to find Byleth had been suppressing the memories of her trauma, believing her to be too weak to handle the responsibility. Soon after, Saigo was forcibly removed from Noelle's mind, and the two were left alone, her body under physical threat now. Byleth ordered Noelle to accept her own actions or face death. She accepted, and memories of her own auto-enucleation flooded her mind. Self-inflicted blindness brought on by the horrors of understanding all that can be seen. Noelle accepted she had become stronger with the truth, and before waking, made a deal with Byleth in return for their full power. Noelle Sélevy surfaced from her mindscape to find that the party of strangers had been surrounded. Following the middle line, the stationary plate's wavelength, she could count the peaking signatures of life and distinguish their placements, their movements, and their weaknesses. She counted 14 from right to left, and they seemed to have only one incoming reinforcement. Not one of them was cambion. Saigo, even without a view of the impending future, was more than capable enough to tackle 4 on her own. Her fierce whipping cuts struck the fear of God in her opponents. And while Noelle could not track her individual swipes, she could feel a new resonance inflict itself on the mortal sound one by one, like an illness. Saigo's remnant was taking a backseat, as though the enemy wore blinders. It did not matter. 4 became 3, and 3 became 2. Evidently, Mick had chosen the strongest foe for himself. Taller than he was, and able to match him blow for blow, like a seasoned boxer. He had a large mass strapped to his back. Must have been a sword. It weighed down his movements significantly, and still, the two were locked in an evenly paced fistfight. An audience of 2 gormless, dumbstruck soldiers watched on, unaware of their worldly responsibilities. Harun too left much of the action to their host alone, providing only the strength and determination required to persist. It was as though they saw it as dishonorable to just outright slaughter mortal men despite the threat they posed. Noelle stood. It appeared that she had been protected once again, for the closest life signature to her own was a man entirely and possibly eternally unconscious. Her rise, however, was considered a challenge, and another faceless figure began to step towards her. "Hey," it told her, "get back down on your belly." "Noelle," called Mick's voice, like the squawk of a distant bird. "1 step forward, 1 to your right. It's a hammer," he yelled. "Pick it up, will ya?" "Get back here and fight me, you baby," called his adversary, sending out 100 socks a minute. "Don't you dare," warned the nearest soldier. "If you pick that hammer up, I swear, I'll cut your goddamn hands off." He had a very loud voice, but he didn't move an inch when she kicked at the weapon to determine its proper location. A hammer felt very cerebral, very real, caused her to question their implied honor. Had she been born with a remnant that could, say, produce swords or yet laser beams, would she feel the same way as them? True to his word, the nearest soldier crouched in low and dashed towards Noelle, weapons free, as she went for the hammer. The moment that her fingers touched the steel bar, she reached out for the bottom line and pulled herself into the filter plate unharmed. As she suspected, the hammer itself followed her in, offering ample time to grasp it in both hands, dart away from where her foe would have landed, and return to the stationary plate with force. And there he was. The nearest soldier was exactly where she'd predicted him to be. Only a few seconds had passed while she'd been away. Though it was a fact that space remained consistent, time seemed to rely more on inertia. They'd cracked it. Together. Now her enemy was confused and still unaware of her inexplicable apparition. She could hearken back to what she'd learned with Byleth only yesterday in the filter plate. She grasped the middle line within her mind, and with all the mental strength she could muster, Noelle pulled herself in the direction of her enemy, weapons free. That was what she could do. Noelle Sélevy had total freedom of movement from resistance, rebellion against physics, and with the impossible momentum offered by this transcendental traversal, Noelle smacked the head of the hammer into her foe. She was a pinball, struck and shot up the lane at incredible speeds. She felt his heart cut out on impact. His music disappeared as his body continued onwards, landing just a few feet ahead of her. She'd been aiming for the head, but she managed to get him in the guts. Regardless, it was at least an answer to the hypothetical. Given that not a single member of the opposition had access to a remnant, it was clear to Noelle that they were up against the Hunters, likely from the citadel Saigo had targeted. Her plan, it seemed, had been foiled, and their campsite had been rumbled. Arriving now, heralded by enemy trumpets and announced by name, Vice Marshal Laika Rossi. Their reinforcements of one had arrived. Laika sauntered over to the group rather slowly, leaving both Saigo and Mick enough time to recognize her, flee from their respective fights, and join Noelle where she was standing. It was mutually and silently agreed that Noelle would likely not get another lucky break like that again. Her abilities, as malleable as they were not suited to flailing blindly with a hammer. It didn't matter, she had her own plans now, and they did not involve winning the fight. The Vice Marshal commanded such attentiveness from the Hunters that the party of strangers could have snuck away if they were quick enough about it. Mick's foe, the tall one with the unused hunk of steel strapped to his back, went as quick as he could to his master, like an obedient dog wishing to be scratched behind the ears. As they spoke in inaudible tones, the ambience surrounding the Hunters seemed to change, as though they themselves were afraid of Laika. Noelle didn't recognize her at all. She seemed to walk with a cane, judging by the sound of her footsteps, but she didn't put any of her weight onto it, so it wasn't a necessity. There seemed to be something strange about her life signature. The noises that only she made seemed amplified, but in an unrecognizable way. It was something on her person, she thought. As the tension ramped up, Mick had some words of advice. He leaned over to Noelle and whispered, "Keep your distance, love. That's the space dog. She's gonna lead that whole army one day, and for good reason." Saigo added, "Watch out for her ribbons. They're weapons. I've seen it all before. Believe it or not, we'll be safe, as long as we keep at least 2.5 meters between us." Laika approached them, so the group took a step back. Laika returned the favor, taking 3 steps. The group, in a shirk of rebellion, retreated 4 steps backwards. This, it would seem, could go on all day, but Laika had little time to play around. "Excuse me," she spoke through cupped hands, the makeshift megaphone. "You are under arrest. You have the right to remain silent, put your hands up, and approach slowly. Nobody else needs to die here today." "I dunno," said Mick. "Kinda fishy, huh?" "Oh, are you asking me?" said Noelle. "Don't worry, I believe in you. Nothing you can't do, huh?" "Don't encourage him," Saigo told her. "I'm thinking about it." "Really?" Mick cupped his hands together back at Laika and shouted, "You gonna kill us?" "Time's up. I need to speak to the actual marshal before we're executed," said Saigo. "I'm willing to bargain with him." Laika didn't have the chance to yell back at them. It was her phone. It was ringing. Noelle could hear it from where she was standing. About 3 meters hung between them, far enough to obscure the caller's voice, but not enough to hide Laika's own reports back to her number 2. It was the Ace of Cups on the line. She had arrived at the waypoint. Citadel Othris is what they called it. She was, verbatim, pretty miffed that Laika and Siegfried were both out of the building, and she expected them to return post-haste. "I shall," said Laika down the phone, "and with me I shall bring our charming, sinful friends." Then the dialogue paused. Noelle felt Mick tense up, like he'd gotten some kind of shiver, and Saigo gripped her sword. The King of Things tore another strip of cloth from his uniform, obscuring the last few words of their conversation before Leica cut the call, stowed her cell, and began addressing the party again with cupped hands. "I'm sorry about this, but please disregard my prior statement," she told them. "The Mother has revoked our no-kill order. Please be prepared. We are authorized to use lethal force in the event that..." Leica's sentence was cut short by her second-in-command, who launched himself from her side like a shuttle, re-entering the atmosphere. She called after him, even called his name. "Siegfried," she shouted, but it fell on deaf ears. In one precise motion, Siegfried pulled the oversized slab of metal from his back and swung with all the force of a small army. Thunderous cracking followed by an unbraceable impact, as though he'd carved a new canyon from the Tasmanian landscape. To Noelle, Mick's strings ceased to exist. His sound vanished, and she could no longer sense the wings of Charon. Speechless, for once, and hollow now, Mick fell in two parts. There was little time to form a goodbye or a regret. Just as quick as he'd closed the distance, Siegfried readied himself for a second strike. He recomposed and evened out the impossible weight of his weapon, shaking Mick's blood from the blade of it. It was without thinking that Noelle grabbed Saigo by the wrist and pulled the both of them into the filter plate. It wasn't something that she knew she could do, but her earlier trick with the warhammer gave her an inkling. As long as they were here, they would remain unharmed. Siegfried seemed inhuman, despite his mortality. His strength and his speed had no parallel in their legion of two now. Mick had the confidence and, well, given his penchant for stories, he had the experience. And Leica's right-hand man had just been toying with him. Saigo seemed in a state of shock, be it her sudden loss or the instantaneous change in location. "Careful," Noelle warned her. "Try not to breathe the air here." It was all that she could manage, given the tension. She didn't know Mick very well. After all, they'd only known each other for approximately 22 hours, give or take. But Saigo, she'd spent her entire career with him, and she'd chosen him, of all people, to rebel with her, to help protect the baby, Nyoro, from the fiends that had done this to them. "He will be missed," she said, toying with something in her hands. The intonation in her voice had not changed. She kept her truest words to herself. Saigo bent at the knees, spread some of the filter's sand with her fingers, and buried the object amongst the imagined fibers. "Believe it or not, I have heard that remnants reform in the filter plate after our death." "I believe it," said Noelle. "I want to believe that Charon might find this strip of cloth that I bury here and remember him fondly as we will," she said, mostly to herself. "God rest the King of Things." Noelle nodded and gave her a moment. She had not taken Saigo to be a religious person, though perhaps her own remnant had gone out of its way to explain the absolute fact of the aforementioned afterlife. While Byleth's woes of disappointment rang through her mind, it was a little comforting to know that he had not just been erased. At least there was something else, regardless of the form it took, for he had been born into a harsh existence against his own will. It would make what needed to happen much easier. It felt a little too soon to be planning their next move, but they could not just wait in the darkness. Time, on the stationary plate, ticked on too fast above to hold a whole funeral service, and the opportune placement of the Ace of Cups would not last them forever. It was a truth that Saigo Satogaeri could not deny, and she had no problem forming a new plan in the depths of the filter plate. In fact, Saigo knew exactly what needed to be done, and she could do it all with Noelle's help. Before their operation began, however, Noelle had one simple question. She wished to know what the filter looked like. She wished for Saigo to describe it to her. It was as though they were standing along the seabed. Sand and silt shifted at their feet as though it was weightless in motion, but stayed flat to the floor if ignored. It was pitch black. Frankly, there was no other phrase for it. The filter plate was in this state of constant, sullen gloaming, and yet Saigo's eyes could see clear as day far, far off into the horizon from where the two of them stood. Light did not shine in the filter, but the landscape was a discernibly different shade of blue from the horizon. Above them, if Saigo looked upwards, there was a thin ring of white, somewhat emulating a dying sun. Though it appeared to be impossibly out of reach, she could see smoke lifting from it. The man-made overcame the few instances of the natural in the distance ahead. Laying stone monoliths, upside-down glass towers nearing tipping point, and there was an old-style motorcar buried hood-deep in the dirt. Here and there were ash-white coral reefs bursting out into the nothingness, leading further into the empty, and there was some significant evidence of unearthly fauna, like footprints and bite marks. "It goes on forever like that," said Saigo. Noelle thought it sounded quite peaceful. Saigo's plan of action was hardly discussed, and it was certainly not up for debate. On the bright side, it was none too complex. It required only one moving part, and that was Saigo herself. Noelle, it was decided, would satchel herself and hang off her back as the soldier displayed her incredible leg strength by flat out running through the Tasmanian bush for as long as she physically could, or, God forbid, until she spotted a cabal of hunters, at which point she would yell the phrase, "Down!" and they would dip from plate to plate. Saigo could pivot, re-coordinate, and start running in another direction before shouting up to return to the real world. Nigh unstoppable, the pair traversed the plains of existence as though they were part of a fast-track highway, totally avoiding the spaghetti junction of the forest reserve. A direct route to their destination. Saigo didn't need to tell Noelle where they were going, she could quite easily tell herself. They were coming up on hundreds, no, thousands of life signatures. Citadel Othris. It seemed that both of them had one last trick up their sleeve. Saigo stopped running, all of a sudden. It became clear, quite quickly, that they were almost intentionally surrounded by all the hunters could throw at them. Somewhere, in the scaled tower that stood before them, was the Ace of Cups, pacing, preparing. How would Saigo Satogaeri recover the infant? Would Ace come down to face them herself? From amongst the innumerable unnamed mortal soldiers, there was an anxious chatter and under-breath ordering. Not one of them moved, nor did they choose to address their unarmed foes, perhaps out of fear. "Hunters of Citadel Othris, stand down," Saigo demanded, with all the authority she still possessed, nearly 2 years after defecting. At least 6 of the soldiers made moves to lower their weapons before being briefly reprimanded and reminded of their orders. Saigo's fist shot up in the air, commanding the attention of every eye in the perimeter. "By authority of the Father, I invoke my right to demand an audience with Grand Marshal Verentine. Verification, the gluttony of the sinful project." A beat passed, and her demands seemed to have some kind of effect on them. The hunters began murmuring again, hastily passing facts back and forth between their ranks and their folds until finally there came an answer from a voice that could silence the crowd. "The Grand Marshal is off island," said the voice. "He won't be back for 3 weeks." "Fuck me," said Noelle. "That's unexpected." "You sound just like Mick," said Saigo. "I'll wait for the Vice Marshal then. As far as I'm aware, my rank still holds, does it not?" A brief murmur came from the crowd, and all seemed to be in some kind of mutual agreement that attacking the two of them was just about the worst thing that they could do. Noelle didn't quite agree. In fact, she knew that they were heavily outnumbered, and escape to the filter plate was their only option other than facing death. Still, it was all the same to the hunters, as if an army was staring right back at them. "Bring her here. Alone. Believe me. If I see that mangy dog of hers, I won't hesitate to take his head." In the last episode of Pinball, Noelle Selevy's party of strangers came under attack by the Cambion factory's homegrown mortal militia, the Hunters. Though their soldiers posed little to no threat, it was the arrival of their vice marshal, Laika Rossi, that struck fear into their hearts. After a brief phone call, the group discovered that the no-kill order protecting their lives was no longer valid. Soldier Siegfried Newsom, Laika's second-in-command, took it upon himself to strike first, and thus, so died Mick Strings, King of Things. Noelle and Saigo fled, leaving behind April S., and took an indirect route via the filter plate to the home of the hunters, Citadel Othris, where Saigo demanded to speak to Grand Marshal Verentine, only to find Laika her only option. Credit to them, the surrounding hunters remained still and steady, despite the fact that the mere presence of Saigo Satogaeri gave them heart palpitations. Noelle was picking it up on their life signatures. The second wait for Laika Rossi took so long that she'd had the time to count that exactly 98 of the 104 soldiers were probably talking to their respective deities. Saigo was unarmed, which prompted Noelle to wonder what she'd done in the past to deserve such a reputation. Mick had mentioned that one thing, about her name, how her power sucked out your senses one at a time, the longer she used it. On reflection, it sounded a little interrogation-y. It could have been something simple that struck a chord with them. It could have been her image alone that did them damage. Was she covered in great, cavernous scars from all her previous victories? It could be assumed that Noelle struck just as much fear in them as Saigo did, and that thought made her a little proud. She felt like Mick would have been impressed how well she'd handled herself. She was a little heartbroken that they'd not gotten to talk about her earlier trick with the hammer, but she could have sworn that he'd shouted "yeah" as she'd done it. She wouldn't be throwing herself into anything like that again. It was time to lay low and remain underestimated. Laika might have been on the way to their location, but the Ace of Cups was closer by, likely lost somewhere in the behemoth before them. Citadel Othris, home to the hunters, rang out to Noelle as though it was made of living mortar. It must have been home to 1 million, maybe more. Worker bees, both above and beneath the ground, steamed away, entirely unaware of outside circumstances. It surely pierced the sky, shooting straight up and out of Noelle's three-dimensional range. It was very distracting. It amounted to the same effect she'd felt near the ocean, where the lines had meshed with the wash of the waves. All those lives, like a nest of fire ants, seemed to writhe together, becoming a viscous, shape-shifting noise that rocked her into seasickness. It was the first time that Noelle needed to tune something out, and it was no more difficult than a brief request to Byleth, who pinched the sound off at the end. It was another few minutes before Laika arrived at the Citadel, along with the remaining members of her squadron. Siegfried was not amongst them, and Noelle could tell that he had been left behind. He wasn't hiding, at least. In fact, once the Vice Marshal had parted the sea of subordinates, her first words were an apology, and perhaps with genuine sincerity. Her second-in-command had been demoted, quote, on the spot, quote, entirely removed from the island for re-education based on his, quote, failure to respond to orders. It didn't seem enough. Noelle wanted to pull him into the filter plate and leave him there to rot. She could not imagine what that would do to a person, and she felt that he deserved it. It was fortunate, then, that Saigo Satogaeri was level-headed. If she held a grudge, it was kept deep below the surface. She didn't tremble as she accepted the space dog's apology, and she didn't say a word after it. Discussion could not commence until the Ace of Cups came down to join them.
All right.
They heard her voice first, coming in over the loudspeaker she wore in her mask. It broke through the yapping crowd like a public service announcement.
Jeez, Laika, take your time, huh? They're nothing but animals, and it's our job to put them down,
she said, sauntering down the Citadel's expansive, concrete stair set. Patient, silent, but certainly there, Noelle could hear the infant, Nyoro, strapped to Ace's chest like a bulletproof vest.
You're no good to us, not if you're gonna be all like that.
Silence, called Laika. Saigo Satogaeri is still the gluttony, and therefore she is still your superior officer, is she not? No, said Ace in a sort of matter-of-fact manner. I mean, She's been missing for nearly 2 years now. I've literally brought you the paperwork that says you should be killing her right now. Pish posh, said Laika. Show me your thumbnails, please. Strangely enough, Saigo obeyed Laika's direction without hesitation. So certain that the Vice Marshal would not attack without prior warning, she left Noelle's side to show Laika her birthmarks. 1, 0. She hasn't been struck through, said Laika. The father would not be best pleased.
Such a softie,
said Ace.
You don't work for the father. This is going to be the Queen of Coins all over again.
Laika countered. And I maintain that the Queen of Coins deserved a fair trial, regardless of the fact
that the Adelaide incident cost us the entire Staves unit,
said Ace as she grit her teeth together.
Yeah.
Laika managed to remain reserved in the face of such brashness, almost to the point of mutiny. It was evident that she would not fight on their behalf, not literally, but she appeared to be in their corner at least. Still, while the hunters and the gatherers acted like total opposites, they were, in the end, two sides of the same charred coin, both in the pocket of this bastard family they kept talking about. Whatever it was that the mother and the father were up to required permanent subservience, and absolutely nothing else. What war is it then? Asked Noelle, in words that came out of her by near pure accident. We are soldiers, aren't we? Or are we? You all seem to just be standing around here, fighting each other.
Honest to God, are you fucking kidding me? No. See, this is what we've got to put up with these guys. You've got to explain everything, all over again, every time they wake them up,
said the Ace of Cups, just irate about it. Her words screeched out of the loudspeaker like feedback.
You don't understand, do you? This whole island is just for you. You statues, you Franken bastards. If you'd just behave and do the job.
What job? She asked. What possible need do you have for reading minds or going to the filter plate or... Saigo, what does Ace do? Saigo answered. Strong hair, she said. Long hair. Come on, said Noelle. What for? For us? In case we escape? Then what the hell are we here for? Defense, dear, said Laika, placing Saigo Satogaeri in handcuffs by the sound of it. No fight from the prisoner, not even an irregular sweat. I understand. We are rather isolated here. Oh, how do I make this clear? Cambion are not the biggest threat in the world, not really. There's always been myths and monsters and things to be afraid of out there. Only, the more the world seemed to meddle in the affairs of the strange, the more blazon the oddities became in return. That's where we come in, of course. We are, and by we I mean all of us, are part of AEGIS, the Anti-Extinction God Initiative System. I cannot tell you in good faith that the world outside is at total war, Noelle, she said. I will, however, implore you to understand that we serve a greater purpose overall. One no more important than that which concerns yourselves, but one that must come first in order for progress to be achieved.
Just think about it, you fucking idiot. You're clearly not the only other cambion, right? So where the hell else is everybody?
Said Ace. The cambion factory works only on a trial and error basis, said Laika. Those who are suited to combat are taken to it. Those suitable for the end game are put into storage.
The director sends the rest of them out to fucking Kansas or goddamn Singapore, man. That's where the action is right now. Singapore. They're dealing with space shit, not stuck here dealing with fucking crybabies like you,
rambled Ace.
Don't get mouthy, reject. You've been struck through.
I know, she said back. I just had a few questions. I don't imagine I've got much time left. Ominous. It almost felt as though she didn't know she was going to say that. It just came out of her. It was the truth, though. She'd known from the very beginning that she wasn't cut out for all this absolute nonsense. Honestly, she was getting pretty sick of it all anyway. It was nothing but shouting and fighting.
Finally,
said Ace.
At least we're on the same page now.
Laika took Saigo to the foot of the concrete steps, where the two discussed with Ace what exactly one could define as a reasonable expectation from a further, more formal, sat-down discussion. Noelle didn't have the luxury of listening in, as two hunters came over from the front row to lock her down with handcuffs too. Over their hushed exchange, the hunters, as if directed to, began rereading her rights in quite a loud register. She had the right to remain silent, and that was pretty much it, but the dialogue itself was actually at least 6 minutes long. Afterwards, she was led to the top of the stairs and told to wait quietly. "I can leave whenever," said Noelle. "I'm fairly certain these are useless." All came to an agreement. Ace would take Saigo to a holding pen, and the mother would be contacted. Neither one of them was quite sure where the mother would be right now, but she was certainly off island. Noelle wondered exactly what Saigo had to offer such a powerful entity, especially one that had only just declared intent to slaughter. Noelle herself would be taken by the Vice Admiral elsewhere in the Citadel. Not a single hunter followed the Tetrad into Othris, but as it turned out, their attendance would have been unnecessary. A grand gate, more than 4 times as large as Noelle herself, shuddered open and allowed them to cross from concrete to marble. It closed itself behind them in an overly dramatic swing, sealing them inside amongst a swarm of echoed footsteps. Reams of soldiers, or associates of, passed their slow-led group from every direction, only nearly nicking Noelle. Leica kept to her side, leading her by the bicep. Apart from the trot of 100 steel-toe caps, the reception hummed with only one other sound: the mechatronic throbbing of multifarious elevator shafts lining the circumference of the room. Not a single person spoke, making it only a modicum easier to concentrate on exactly what was happening. Noelle and Saigo were being separated without final, parting words. Hell, she was already lost amongst the grand central chaos of Citadel Othris. It seemed like a done deal for Saigo, though. Noelle couldn't help anymore. Not that she had helped, not very much. So she wished her well, knowing that she was doing what she felt was necessary to keep that child safe. It made her think of Mick and how he never got to sock the father once and for all. It made her think about Leica's apology and how she'd meant it, but what did that mean anyway? And what did it matter? Briefly, she wondered about April S. and where the hell that goat had gone. Last of all, she thought about herself and how she would carry out her end of the deal. Leica slowed them to a stop by tapping her cane, and a set of elevator doors clunked open for them. It sounded like an old system, loose and rickety, compared to the sparkle of recently polished marble and soft, conditioned air. "Let's go, okay?" said Leica, taking her one step at a time onto the bobbing platform. "You don't have to be so gentle," said Noelle, shaking her handcuffed fists. "I'm a prisoner, aren't I?" The Vice Marshal said nothing. She slid her finger down what sounded like 1,000 buttons, almost unsure of which to choose. After all, where exactly would you keep somebody who could leave whenever they please? Then the doors slid closed, and the rumbling started up. It became impossible to tell how fast or far and in which direction they were going, but the taste of the air suggested they were heading deep, deep underground. "Where have you taken Saigo?" asked Noelle. Leica let her bicep go, reached behind her, and folded down a stool from the walls of the vessel, and asked, "Would you like a seat, dear?" With conviction, the prisoner repeated her question. "Saigo Satogaeri has surrendered herself to AEGIS," said Leica. "She will be allowed to bargain with the mother for the return of infant 020, and if all goes well as I would expect, the mother should have no qualms with placing them together in the holding cells." "Nyaro," said Noelle. "Baby's name is Nyaro." "Oh, is it now?" Leica rummaged through a zipped knapsack she kept somewhere on her uniform. From it, she produced a pencil and a small notebook. "One moment." She pressed the notebook against the trembling walls and took down a few notes. "Nyaro," she repeated. "I'll remember that." Back it went, into the knapsack, and Noelle remembered her lone right to silence. "I am taking you to B landing. From there, I will escort you to the ant hill. It's our emergency exit strategy," said Leica. "This place was built by witches in the 18th century. Did you know that?" Noelle did not pull the thread. "I don't need an emergency exit strategy," she said, thinking she might blip in and out just to prove it to her. She didn't, in fear that she might apparate amongst the sand and prove Byleth's earlier theory correct. "I can go anywhere." "I am aware," replied Leica, tapping on the knapsack. I am doing my grandest to offer you ample escape time from 0 floor. The anthill is the furthest point below ground." "Well," said Noelle. She was a little stunned, but pressed forwards regardless. "Why the fuck would you do that?" "Call it a conscience, if you will," she said. "I have seen an awful lot since I replaced the prior vice marshal last month, and yet, what my lieutenant pulled this afternoon, I can only apologize." "Oh yeah," said Noelle. "Means a lot, thank you. Contrary to what you may believe, I don't wish harm on you." Leica spoke with conviction, nearly innocence, but one doesn't get a position like vice marshal by being nice, do they? Saigo understood that, as did Mick, bless him. She tapped the bag again. "King of things, right? I can do nothing for you but apologize, but I must have you know that Siegfried was never a choice of mine. If I am to be honest, I have seen him as nothing but a punishment. It could only have been that. It was the decree of the Grand Marshal, so that's that. I am glad to be rid of him, though it happened by unfortunate circumstances." There it was again. Leica Rossi seemed to strike such a fine balance in Noelle's mind, where her words were simultaneously aggravating and yet understandable, like she had a certain difficulty articulating herself to the degree that her vocabulary might suggest. Taking after Mick, she wanted nothing more than to sock her. Byleth stirred, interjecting that she should not allow herself to lose her cool, and yet she silenced them with only a thought. "I am truly sorry. I only very recently learned your true nature," Leica continued, "and since then, I have been having second thoughts about AEGIS as a whole." "Excuse me?" Leica paused for a moment, then took up the seat she'd set up earlier. "Are you aware of your construction?" she asked, to which Noelle nodded. A more specific answer did not feel necessary. "The Ace of Cups is cambion, but she was not built. The Ace of Cups was born. She was raised, she went to school, she graduated, she was offered an opportunity and she took it. Delivered unto her was the remnant, Shax. Now AEGIS is able to drop her around the world to capture rogue cambion for the company's benefit." Noelle's focus was elsewhere. Just as she was thinking about the length of the elevator ride, it jutted and stopped. Recoil knocked her off her feet and she hit the floor face first with a thunder. Leica leapt to her assistance, throwing out an arm like a ring boy, but Noelle swatted it away with her cuffed fists. She could, at the very least, stand up on her own. It would just take some doing. "We alight here, at B landing," said Leica, taking her at the bicep again. Contrary to 0 floor, B landing had no enemy presence, many above, some below, but nobody on this particular floor. Here, she felt she could allow Byleth to breathe and flood her ears once more with life's raucous cacophony. Somewhere, amongst the stochastic discord, was the twin signature that belonged to the Ace of Cups. "Seek it," said Noelle under her breath. "Help me." "Did you say something, dear?" asked Leica, stepping the two of them off the elevator platform. "You'll have to forgive me. I'm afraid my ears aren't as good as yours are." Probing for the Ace of Cups was like choosing a novel from a bookshelf of 4 edges. Outright, there were no cambion above her, at least as far as her range was concerned. And when she scanned beneath herself, she felt more than she'd wished. 3? No, maybe there were 4 cambion elsewhere in the building. Not one of them stood together. Ideally, she was looking for 2 cambion at once, Ace and Nyaro, but she couldn't do it. Hope crossed the prisoner's mind. Perhaps the mother had made good with Saigo, but Saigo wasn't amongst them either. From so far away, the applicable wavelengths felt more like thin threads, so she could hardly read the peaks. She'd have recognized Saigo, though. She'd know that familiar buzzing, and it was nowhere to be found. Now, don't worry yourself silly," said Leica, thumbing the buttons once more. "I can promise that the Ace of Cups has no grounds to strike Saigo or Nyaro, not while we're here. If you can't sense them, then all is well. They will be put to sleep in the holding cells, in the same way that you were." "How do you know?" she said. "Don't tap that goddamn notebook, I swear." "No, dear. Smoke comes out of your ears when you do it," she said. "Just a joke." "Stop calling me dear, will you?" snapped Noelle, her temper shortened by the excess of noise. It could only be assumed that the life signature currently moving through the citadel was Ace, so discarding the other three for now, she followed it, focused on it, and had Byleth slowly filter out anything that wasn't her. It stopped for a moment, and then all of a sudden it got closer and closer and closer until it passed right by her. It shot up, straight towards 0 floor. The aged screech of the elevator system all but confirmed it. It was the Ace of Cups and her remnant shacks. Impulse burned through her. As she had learned, Noelle reached out in her mind to grasp that resonance that Ace gave off. Nothing happened. Not right away. But that did not stop her. She kept on at it, refusing to let go as it slipped further and further away, stretched it, hung on for dear life. Could Ace feel that? Did it mean anything to her? Was it happening at all? Perhaps like a sort of placebo effect. The strain she was putting herself through simply felt like it was doing something. Shall we get going then? Asked Leica, snapping Noelle out of her trance. Going where? Asked Noelle, expecting soon some kind of headache or nosebleed in return for over-strenuous thinking. Where the fuck do you think I'm gonna go? I suppose I hadn't thought of that, she said. I'm not exactly an ally, Noelle. I'm just doing my bit, so to speak. She hesitated at the end of that sentence, like she recognized that that clearly wasn't enough, so to speak. She didn't act on it though. Behind her, the elevator they'd just stepped out of closed back up and returned to 0 floor. Saigo might have trusted you, Leica, but I don't, she said. You're just the space dog, or whatever, to me. You're a bad guy. Jesus, one of you cut my goddamn friend in half without a fucking word. I don't want your help, Leica Rossi, it's fucking meaningless. Vitriol spewed out of her, and an immediate wash of shame dripped down the back of her neck. She felt a little embarrassed because she'd done it without thinking the words through. At the same time, though, it was good that she could feel that shame again. Shame was better than nothing at all, and at the very least, she'd gotten the bulk of it off her chest. It was her last chance, really. That same elevator was now back on its way down, carrying inside it the Ace of Cups. At the very least, said Noelle, you could take off my handcuffs. I'm afraid not, Leica replied. She'd taken notice of the elevator too, tilting her head behind her. Shall we board? She asked, before it's too late. That time had come, however. Noelle Sélevy had resorted to death. The returning elevator dinged, and the old doors chugged open once more. Out came Ace, the Gatherer. She was no longer wearing a mask, her voice definitively feminine. That you, is it? Making all that noise in my head? In the last episode of Pinball, following the death of Mick Strings, Noelle Sélevy and Saigo Satogaeri were handcuffed and separated without a word to each other. The two entered the Hunter's Citadel Othris. Saigo was imprisoned by the Ace of Cups, and Noelle was taken by Vice Marshal Leica Rossi. A guilty party, Leica intended on allowing Noelle to escape, taking her as far away from Ace as she could. However, the prisoner refused to leave of her own accord. On her way to the deepest depths of the Citadel, Noelle caught a hint of the Ace of Cups and called out to her, though she did not believe it worked. Still, the elevator soon began to move again, and with it brought the Ace of Cups herself. This was it. Noelle Sélevy had been waiting for this moment, and yet she felt entirely unprepared. She had to confirm first. Where is Saigo? She asked. Where is Nyoro? Ace obliged, though she did so through grit teeth. Under lock and key, she said. Leica, got some handover for you here. The mother sends her regards. She has agreed to the gluttony's terms of surrender, so the two of them will remain together in holding cell red. Guess what? She's coming here, so you gotta have them up in 15 days. It didn't feel much like a victory, but at least, she supposed, they were together. It was easy to believe that Saigo was playing some long game, given that she wouldn't die. But that only brought on further questions of what exact use the cambion were to AEGIS. Noelle shot for it. What's the plan then? She didn't get much in response. You don't deserve the same treatment, apparently. Ace cracked her neck in 2 places, then her fingers, and her back in that order. Limbering herself up, she hopped in place. Ace's remnant, Shax, stood front and center, a direct opposition to the form taken by Mick or Saigo in battle. Shax manifested to Noelle as a noise, hoarse but subtle. She could discern only the sound of iron and feathers, partly disguised by the slow, synchronized threshing of 1,000 worms. "Now, I'm not allowed to kill you," said Ace, "but I am allowed to rough you up a little bit." Leica did not stray from her position. One hand remained wrapped around Noelle's bicep, still directing her onto the adjacent elevator, waiting to take them below ground. Leica's other hand tapped relentlessly with her cane, urging Noelle forward furthermore. That was not the plan, though a spanner had been thrown in the works. Anxiety abound, expelled by Byleth. It had been brought on by Noelle's one fleeting, intrusive thought about how she might find herself trapped amongst the sand fiber terrain, given how deep underground they'd gone. It came up again and again. In fact, Byleth warned Noelle against utilizing that particular ability just in case, because nobody had ever tried it. As she'd discovered, space remained relatively consistent, so it would only make sense. At least, that's how her brain transmogrified these intense, fluctuating concepts. Would she just take her lumps? And then what? What if Saigo didn't intend on getting back out? Hell, what if she was moved to a separate location, or even just kept deeper below ground for safety? It might have been worth the risk, but Byleth pleaded otherwise with a reasonable case to boot. Putting herself at such risk would be in direct violation of their agreement, and that was unacceptable. "Lumps it is," said Noelle to herself. Now, said Leica, "you know well enough that being the Ace of Cups grants you no authority under this citadel's roof, let alone beneath its ground. Are you not scheduled to be elsewhere? I wouldn't leave it too late to get going." Ace didn't respond to, well, what appeared to be an insult. She didn't need to. Noelle tugged her arm away from the Vice Marshal. "I knew you did it," said Ace. "I don't know how you did it, but I felt that noise in my bones and I knew it was you doing it. You did it on purpose. Didn't you? Didn't you? Didn't you?" "I did," she said, repeating herself for Leica's sake. "I did do that, yeah." "It hurt," said Ace. "Thought it was coming through my helmet, so that had to go." "Well, you don't look any different to me," said Noelle, with the elevator door closing behind her. "I'm not going willingly. I don't have some great plan like Saigo." "Great plan, huh?" mused Ace, taking a step forward. "I gotta say, I like that fresh baby naivete you Frankenfucks have." Shax's worm-ridden mass tightened to fewer, squirming tentacles below the surface of her person, and on the outside, Ace herself grew. A gurgle, some guttural ache, came from Shax to accompany the transformation as her hair began to extend outward and overwhelm the flesh. From the top of her head she grew razor whips, which could carve canals into the parched concrete floor of B Landing. Her body hair grew out too, lining the surface of her skin with pinprick protective spikes and rendering any strike a detriment. Don't be a dumbass. She's not getting out, and neither are you. You could have done it by now, right? The mother has rescinded your no-kill order because you fell into our laps, Noelle, and it's easier than fishing your goddamn remnant out of the filter again. Thought bubbled beneath Leica's bare-faced honesty. It was time to choose a side, and without hesitation, it seemed certain she would side with the Gatherer. She hit the elevator button again. "I resign myself," she said. "Whatever will be, will be." "Noelle, they made you, and it cost them quite a bit of money to do it. Plus, some of you is quite rare, found only in very limited quantities and only in one body." With that, Ace struck, No need to close the distance, her hair did all of the work. Straight shot, sucker punch to the guts. Noelle had no chance. She slumped to the ground, holding herself at the stomach in case it had gone straight through her. After a moment, she could compose herself and stand again. The son, they call him, he's kept in the cambion factory, Ace continued, deep underground, so that when they need another one of you lot, they can just slice a bit off. There's only so much of him left now. Ace struck again. A battering ram swung in low and took Noelle off her feet. I have to keep you relatively intact, but you are very durable, aren't you? Noelle got up quicker this time. She hoped to have inherited Mick's mantra. Whenever I get my ass handed to me, I always come back stronger. Ace was much too fast for Noelle to hit back, though that didn't stop her rushing in to try it. Seeking Ace's aura, Noelle tugged on the stationary plate's wavelength to pinball herself once more, but the gatherer countered her expedited movements with a swift clothesline strike. One kick, two kicks, leather boot meets teeth without any sign of stopping until Noelle can pull herself back towards the motionless vice marshal. Her quick thinking caught Ace off guard just for a second. Enough time to spit out her front two teeth before Ace's hair whipped out again to strike 3 more times at her ribs. It was like going up bare knuckle against a pitching machine. What's worse was that each impact made Ace just that 1 iota more dangerous, as the friction caused her hair to melt together and harden at the ends. Like knives, these rock-hard clumps were now cutting Noelle as they flew by her, sending ropes of her blood in Laika's direction. The Ace of Cups allowed her to stand, only to strike her down once more without even moving. You about ready to hand yourself in? Asked the gatherer. I'm sure it's hard for the vice marshal to watch this. It's kind of pathetic. Don't mind so much myself. Just not sure where I should stop. As she delivered that last sentence, her hair began to contort together above her. It was to be dropped on Noelle, a strike nearly heavier than herself. It did not land on her though. Even though she felt the air shift as the gatherer made the necessary motions. Well, Ace said. Got something to say, space dog? Laika Rossi had stopped the strike. She was now standing in front of Noelle, her cane above her head to defend from the mass of iron-tight hair. You have said far too much for this to continue, she ordered from beneath the attack. With a grunt, she forced back and sent the hair back in recoil. You may have direct authority from the mother, but she is not omniscient. Do you think she would approve of this barbarity? Did you think I would stand for it? From that same cane, Laika unsheathed a ribbon-thin blade, like an arm-length box cutter. It sliced inches off Ace's top, so quickly that Noelle couldn't even follow her signature. It was more difficult with Laika. Noelle was attuned to seeing twinned wavelengths, but Laika only had her own, quiet, mortal lifeline. Noelle collapsed under the weight of all her injuries. Her body was fast-acting, sealing the slash marks on her biceps and the puncture wounds in her chest, but it still hurt. It hurt a lot. Each attack had left foreign fibers throughout her flesh, and they held their position like porcupine quills. Once more, Noelle Sélevy had proven herself to be nothing more than dead weight. Even in the struggles that she had started herself, Byleth continued their howling. It's not worth the risk, they said. Sit back and wait for your opportunity. Still handcuffed, Noelle was unsure exactly what Byleth expected her to do. You're making a huge mistake, Laika, shouted the Ace of Cups, finally made breathless for the first time. You'll get the sack. Ace launched a small piercing attack, but Laika had not been made vice marshal by sheer luck. She could neatly dodge Ace's uncalculated barrage of straight shots, but would only strike her opponent with her empty fist. She wasn't looking to win the fight, she was again looking to delay it. At some point, she was expecting Noelle to just leave. Will you stop these silly games, Ace? Laika yelled, grabbing the gatherer by the face and forcing her to the ground. For a moment, it seemed like the match was over. Do yourself a favor and remember that they are people, Ace. They are all people. God, she said, and dropped her weapon in anguish. What are we doing here, Ace? It was all the chance the gatherer needed. Laika's open-ended thought had hardly made it to her ears before Ace swept her feet and took her to the ground. With a second strike, Ace knocked her clean out for the count, and might have taken 2 of her teeth as she went. As Ace let loose this primal scream and beat her chest in victory, rebellion overruled the reject one final time. Fury had taken charge, absolute incredible seething rage which beat about her body like it was bursting blood vessels, burst through her skin in the form of steam. She grit her remaining teeth so hard they shattered and cut her gums. Still, with an open mouth full of aged tombstones, Noelle took to Ace with the same technique she had applied earlier, only this time, she had chosen to silence all but the noises needed. No more Byleth. The ambience was gone. It was just Shax, just herself, and just that third line. On impact, Noelle sunk what was left of her incisors deep into her enemy. Just barely, she pierced the leather armor and drew blood. She did not feel the cactus prick point of her defensive body hair. It really did not matter much. It could only hurt for so long now. In that instant, as Ace yelped out in pain, Noelle defied the order of her co-pilot and pulled them both into the filter plate. Noelle had decided, whether with a clear mind or otherwise, that the end result no longer mattered. She refused to play the clueless pawn any longer, and she refused to ask any more questions. Byleth, who would take the promise of life at face value, could not be trusted in that moment. In retrospect, Byleth would agree, though by the time they realized where they'd apparated, they had already landed. It was the absolute opposite. They had not found themselves amongst the negative space of terrain, but in fact, off the side of a cliff. Noelle was numb, still, from the near involuntary nature of the act. She was still piecing it together. It had not been a long fall. At least, it had not felt like it. But both parties present knew that Noelle had broken her neck. In reality, it had almost been removed from her torso on impact. Ace had landed elsewhere, but Noelle couldn't sense her. Clearly, she must have slipped loose from the moor the moment they began falling, but the momentum may have sent her tumbling out into the vast emptiness. She could have been anywhere, and she was trapped there, forever. Noelle had done her part. Nobody would ever be struck by the Ace of Cups again. She would wander, immortal and lost, straying further and further from her starting point, further and further from any chance of discovery. It was the least she could do. That's how noelle sélevy justified her actions. For all the dirt she'd done, for the pain she'd caused the party of strangers. At least now, Laika Rossi might make the right choice. And with that, the agreement between Byleth and Noelle had been successfully seen through to the end. Byleth had granted Noelle complete control as soon as she decided to take the reins. And, in return, Noelle returned them to the filter plate to die what might be considered a natural death. You have been listening to Pinball, the complete series. Originally published in 2021, written and directed by Jake Lucy. This production is copyright 2026 by the Sleepy Bones Detective Agency and is intended for enjoyment purposes only. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. If you like this show, you might like chucking me a buck on patreon.com/sbda or buying a digital zine at sbda.itch.io. Please visit us on the web at carefulthere'sbones.com for more surreal stories. Have a good night.